Hello, good day. Today is Thursday, February the 25th. And yes, we are in World Civ. And today we are still, of course, still talking about imperialism, but today we're talking about imperialism in the Middle East. But before we get to that, there was one question that I showed you and then didn't show you an answer to, and you do need to know this. And the question was, who is John Bull? Yes. Who is John Bull? Well, John Bull is, and I just briefly said, it's the representative of Great Britain, the British version of Uncle Sam. Uncle Sam, the person with the beard and the hat represents the United States. And the British have one as well. They call him John Bull. And so what does he look like? Well, here he is. Yeah, this is John Bull. No, and he's always, not always, but pretty much of the time depicted the same way. He's a very stocky fellow, as you see there, has a broad, barrel chest. And normally he wears a vest that has the Union Jack. That's always an identifier, the flag. And normally he wears this top hat. Normally he wears white pants and a navy blue, waistcoat, and boots, and that's normally what he looks like. That's classic John Bull. This John Bull, by the way, is taken from a World War One recruiting picture. But now let's look at some other versions. John Bull gets he's a cartoon character, of course, and so he often gets lampooned. And so let's look at this. Now we're not even going to talk about the meaning of this cartoon, but this is John Bull as well. We'll talk about this cartoon when we get closer to World War One. But yeah, that's John Bull, and so is this. In fact, while we're learning stuff, this is John Bull. See, waistcoat, British flag, the white pants, the boots, the hat. Here he looks more like kind of a goofy fellow, obviously. This character here represents, I bet you can't guess. See the pointed helmet? Can anybody guess? Yes, that's Germany. This is a character of the Kaiser Wilhelm II. This guy represents, anybody want to guess this one? France, yes. The French, for a long time, their caricature always had this cheesy beard mustache thing going on. Basically looking like Napoleon III, but that's another subject. So, yeah, that's John Bull. And so you needed to see that. But let's get on with today, shall we? All right, Roman numeral 9. The European powers expanded their powers by conquering, colonizing the former lands of the Arab and Ottoman empires. And because of that, I made you a map. Well, I pulled you up a map. This is the Middle East in 1914. And once again, notice those colonies that are outright owned by the British in purple. See here, as well as here. I'm telling you once again, the country that was a master of the international monopoly game of getting the most valuable territories were the British. The French owned a lot of territory here in North Africa. Yeah. The Italians got in on the game too. This is what we now call Libya. It was once an Italian colony. The Spanish owned a few remnants of their empire here. Morocco. Independent. This is independent, which is kind of funny because I say it's funny because you know what's here? Sand. Yeah, it's called the empty quarter. I mean, literally, it is one of the world's largest sandboxes. Nothing but hundreds of thousands of square miles of sandbox. I mean, really, and yeah, this was independent. This is what will eventually become Saudi Arabia. But now this area here in the green is the Ottoman Empire, the declining Ottoman Empire, and that is their flag. Notice the flag that I put there on your assignment today. Yeah, so that's the Ottoman Empire. And now, but there are also some spheres of influence. The Russians had pushed well down into this country today, the red and the yellow here. Today, this is what we call Iran. Back then, they called it Persia. The Russians were dominant in this part, and the British were dominant down here. And the British parked themselves right here for the purpose of blocking the Russians. We're going to talk about the Great Game a little bit later on, but basically the Great Game was a rivalry between the British and the Russians in Asia, and they called it the Great Game because the British and the Russians are always trying to outflank each other in Asia, gaining possessions. I mean, like for example, Russia wanted to expand southward towards the Persian Gulf, and the British blocked them. It's classic tic-tac-toe, it's classic Risk, it's classic, Monopoly. And so, yeah, let's go on, shall we? All right. The Ottoman Empire, which we just looked at, Ottoman Empire, right? In fact, all I gotta do is, forgive me, all I gotta do is click that. No, I don't. Important. Getting messed up here. Let's go here. Yeah, the Ottoman Empire, once again, that's it here in the green, had strategic regions on both the Red Sea and the Persian Gulf here. And of course, the Ottoman Empire, this is one of the most strategic waterways in the world that the Russians wanted to get their mitts on. Now, this green line here, by the way, is worth noting because you see this green line? At one point in time, this marked the outward boundaries of the Ottoman Empire. Went all the way up into Europe, far into Asia, and most of North Africa. But as we're about to see, the Ottoman Empire was in a period of decline during this time. So, yeah. So, as it says, the Ottoman Empire tried to reform itself into a modern power and halt its 300-year decline, had failed, and the Ottoman Empire existed only to serve the balance of power in Europe. That is a favorite saying of the 19th century. That the Ottoman Empire existed only to serve the balance of power in Europe. You say, well, what does that mean? Simply means this. The Ottoman Empire, as it says there, was a declining empire. It was a fledgling. It was weak. It couldn't even defend itself from an invasion by any of the other European powers. And also, it could not even keep a lid on all of the revolts, the various ethnic revolts from the various, for example, the Arabs who wanted independence from the Ottoman Empire, and the other groups, the Iraqis, the Persians who wanted independence, the Armenians who wanted independence from the Ottomans. They couldn't even keep those from occurring. Now, those various groups that I just mentioned, none of them were strong enough to kick out the Ottomans, but at the same time, the Ottomans were not strong enough to basically squelch those revolts. And so the saying was the Ottoman Empire existed only to serve the balance of power in Europe. So once again, what does that mean? Well, it simply means this, that had any of those countries that I mentioned, Russia, Austria, England, France, even Prussia, Germany, if they had taken the notion to, had decided they wanted to invade the Ottoman Empire, to conquer the empire, and the Russians really wanted to. Any one of them could have done it and would have been successful, would have defeated the Ottoman Empire, taken it over. He said, well, why didn't they? Well, because it would have been advantageous to them. The Russians really would have loved to have had the Russians would have really loved to have had this piece of property right here. Yeah, the Russians really wanted this. They would have loved to have had that, but what kept them from having it was the balance of power. If the Russians got that, the Russians would have been too strong, and that would have upset the balance of power. So the other countries would not allow Russia or any other power to take over the Ottoman Empire. So, getting back to Ottoman history, when Suleiman I, also called Suleiman the Magnificent, Suleiman Magnificent, interesting person. Um, when Suleiman the Magnificent was born, the first, I'm sorry, when Suleiman the Magnificent was named the next Sultan, the first thing he did was to strangle all 70 of his brothers. So there would be no question as to who the next sultan would be. The name Suleiman, by the way, is a Ottoman pronunciation of Solomon, who, if you know the Bible, the Old Testament, Solomon, the son of King David, Solomon the Wise. Fact of the matter is, if I have not mentioned it before, and I don't think I have, if you were to go to the Congress of the United States Capitol, in the halls of Congress, there is a picture of Moses, Ten Commandments, Thomas Jefferson, author of the Declaration of Independence, and Suleiman the Magnificent, the great lawgiver. He was also called Suleiman the Wise. But anyway, when he died in 1566, he was followed by a succession of weak rulers. For example, the guy that succeeded Suleiman the Magnificent was a guy named Selim the Sot, S-O-T. S-O-T. That means he was a drunkard. I mean, that's the kind of leadership the Ottoman Empire had. And it just kept getting worse. So when Selim III came into power in 1789, he attempted reforms such as modernizing the army, but he was overthrown. Nationalist movements, those independence movements, the Arabs, for example, the Persians, for example, the Iraqis, the Armenians, the Lebanese, for example, rose up across the Ottoman Empire. And that was trouble. As it says there, remember, the Ottoman Empire was a Turkish empire. The Ottomans were Turks, okay? But there were over 100 different ethnic groups that lived, Albanians, Montenegrins, Greeks, Serbs, etc., who lived in the Ottoman Empire, and each wanted to get out from under Ottoman Turkish rule. Greece did gain its independence in 1830. European nations, once again, especially Russia, began to look for ways to exploit Ottoman weaknesses and gain territory at Ottoman expense. What is geopolitics? Simple. It's like playing Risk. I mean, that's what it is. It's playing Risk only for real. I mean, I don't know how many have played Risk. I've never played it, but I know the game. Basically, you take your armies and you try to control various parts of the globe and outflank your opponents. For lack of a better comparison, once again, it's international monopoly, getting the best places so that you can give yourself an advantageous position against potential enemies. Buying up Boardwalk and Park Place, which actually I think in Monopoly is not. I've never found that owning Boardwalk and Park Place was that great of an advantage. For some reason, the dice don't land there that often. Actually, the place that I found the dice land the most often was Indiana, the three red ones, Indiana, Illinois, and I forget the other one, Avenue. But it's about geopolitics is about owning, taking over strategic venues. For example, the tip of South Africa for the British. For example, the island of Singapore, which guards the Straits of Malacca. For example, the British owning Gibraltar, which guards the entrance into the Mediterranean Sea. That's geopolitics. World powers were attracted to these strategically advantaged points on the globe. Play Monopoly. The Ottoman Empire controlled many of these points, such as the Bosporus and the Dardanelles. And you're saying, Mr. Horton, what's the Bosporus and the Dardanelles? Once again, this. Yeah, the Ottoman Empire owned this. Very strategic. And so, yeah. The Ottomans controlled access to the Atlantic and the Mediterranean Sea trades, as well as the Black Sea ports. What was the importance of the Bosporus and the Dardanelles? Well, the Bosporus and the Dardanelles were Russia's only in the Mediterranean Sea. How did the discovery of oil in the Persian Gulf in 1900 affect European imperialism? Well, suddenly all that sand that I was just talking about, all those deserts, got a lot more valuable. Yes, they discovered oil in the Persian Gulf region, and suddenly many of the European countries who began using diesel fuel and began using oil for greasing of machine parts, and that was what the main use of it for at first. I mean, here's what's funny. Thinking about oil, petroleum. When they first began mining petroleum, including in this country, and and they would pull it out of the ground. At the top would be this more, the oil is black and thick and greasy, and at the top would be this more um, clear, not clear, but more clear, very volatile substance that they would throw away. And you say, well, what's that volatile substance? It was gasoline. Yeah, I mean, at first they threw away gasoline, kept the oil. The oil was used for, once again, lubricating machine parts. Prior to the use of petroleum to do that, they used whale oil. I mean, they'd have to go out and kill whales to get the oil, the fat from the whale's body, and use that to lubricate machine parts. Yeah. But anyway, they began using oil, and so the discovery of oil in the Persian Gulf made the Middle East a lot more valuable. Ah, yes, the Crimean War. The Crimean War was a war, once again, fought between Russia versus, well, let's see here now. I should write that. Russia versus the Ottoman Empire, but the Ottoman Empire had help. The Ottoman Empire, the Ottoman Empire also had Great Britain, France, and yes, Russia versus the Ottoman Empire, Great Britain, and Sardinia. Here's the thing, though. You say, well, why did particularly? You can understand why Russia and the Ottoman Empire went to war. Russia wanted Ottoman territory. Basically, that was it. In the end, that was it. So why did Britain, France, and Sardinia jump in? Because once again, you go back up here. The Ottoman Empire existed to serve the balance of power. Had Russia conquered the Ottoman Empire, Russia would have, let's go back to the map, Russia would have been able to take all of this, and then the Russian Navy could have gotten out here into the Mediterranean, and all of these European colonial possessions like French North Africa, British Egypt, and eventually in 1860, eventually they were going to dig a Suez Canal here, and all those valuable properties the Russian Navy would have been able to threaten. And so they said, no, you're not going to do that. All right, so back to the matter at hand. How was it resolved? Well, Russia got their pants hand. They got beat like they stole something. They lost big time. although it was not an especially well fought war. I mean, there were lots and lots of casualties that were probably useless. Um, in the end, though, basically, though, you have industrialized countries like Great Britain and France who were able to produce arms and armaments uh, with factories, and they could just keep producing them. Russia was not an industrial country. They were overwhelmed and outmatched eventually. But still, even in doing that, the British lost lots of men and the Russians lost a lot more. And probably the greatest thing to come out of it was this person here. Her name, Florence Nightingale. Florence Nightingale. Did I spell that right? Nope. Florence Nightingale. She was the founder of modern nursing. Yeah, Florence Nightingale. Okay, so Florence Nightingale, this war, the Crimean War, once again, is fought predominantly here in the Crimean Peninsula, which here's France, and Britain is not even on the map. That meant that British and French soldiers had to go all the way here to fight it. And, soldiers were getting wounded. Well, this woman, Florence Nightingale, who was a nurse, decided that she wanted to help the British effort by taking a crew of about 30 nurses to the Crimea and to help wounded British soldiers. Here's an interesting thing about the Crimean War. During the Crimean War, 1852 to 1854, during the Crimean War, if you had been wounded on the battlefield in the Crimean War, you stood a better chance of survival of that wound if they actually just left you on the battlefield as opposed to taking you to a military hospital. That was the state of military hospitals at that point in time. In fact, hospitals in general. You have to remember that in 1852, they didn't know what germs were. They knew there was a thing called infection. They understood that. They just didn't know what caused it. They had no idea. And so these hospitals became overrun with the bodies of dead people, well, of dying and dead men. And, they were filthy, filthy holes. But here's the thing. So Florence Nightingale and her nurses show up and they say, we want to help. Well, the British military high command, medical staff said, no, you're not helping us. It is improper for women to touch men. It's improper, to treat wounded people in a hospital. I mean, you can ask any nurse today. They see lots of people naked and they put their hands on people. And the British High Command said, no, that's not proper. It can't be done. I mean, I guess they envisioned these romances breaking out between these women and these men who, were missing limbs and in terrible pain, And so they wouldn't let them help them. And so for a while, they just sat there. These Florence Nightingale and her 30 nurses just sat there. And then so she went back to high command and said, okay, look. All right, we're not going to touch the guys. How about this? Just let us clean up. Just let us clean the place up. Because, the hospital, in fact, I was about to say the hospital was a sewer. Actually, the center of the hospital, where most of the men died, actually sat on top of an open sewer. And you got these men right there next to it. And the British officers could not put two and two together that their highest rates of mortality for their soldiers were the ones who were located right next to that sewer. And, she started, of course, they began stripping bed sheets, they began washing everything, washing bandages, all those kind of things. And She was then became entrusted with more and more responsibility. Eventually, the British soldiers, they referred to her, Florence Nightingale, as the lady with the lamp, because she, unlike her male counterparts, would actually, in the night, actually walk amongst the wounded, check on them, see to their needs, because for the British medical doctors and their orderlies, when the sun went down, they were out of there. I mean, they left those wounded soldiers alone through the night, uh, amongst the rats and the filth. And if you had a crisis during the night, seizure or something like that, you were just on your own. Well, Florence Nightingale and her nurses, they began to patrol the halls during the night to see to care for them. And so probably the most important thing to come out of the Crimean War was Florence Nightingale, and the practice of modern nursing. She founded it. All right, so back to that here. So anyway, how was it resolved? The Russians lost big time. In the peace treaty at the end of the war, the Russians lost the right to use the Black Sea for its navy. Okay, now you're saying, what is that again, Mr. Ward? I have to keep using this map. This is the Black Sea. Mer Noir. This is a French map. That's the Black Sea. And Russia is up here, This is Russia. They lost complete use of it. That was a terrific blow to the Russian military power, Russians' ability to exert influence around the world. I mean, it's basically like they cut off their right arm. And the Russians are going to want that right arm back. And so, yeah. Ottoman Empire also lost lands in its empire. I mean, that's one of the unique things. The Ottoman Empire lost Romania, Montenegro, Cyprus, Bosnia, Herzegovina, and Bulgaria. I mean, that was one of the interesting things. Even though the Ottoman Empire was on the winning side of the war, they lost territory. For one thing, it just showed that the British and French, they didn't care about the Ottoman Empire. The British and French just wanted to make sure that Russia didn't get more powerful. The Crimean War was the first war to be covered by war correspondents for the news, first time. In many ways, yeah, the Crimean War was the first modern war. It's the first war where you see the influence of the Industrial Revolution. Lots of ships, lots of material made by industrial factories, war correspondence, those kind of things. And as it says there, compare the size of the Ottoman Empire in 1699 with 1914. This map again shows you that. See, this is what the Ottoman Empire looked like in 1699. And this green area is what it looked like in 1914. In other words, it had shrank considerably. Yes. Oh, what was the Great Game? Now, the Great Game, once again, was a contest between Britain and Russia. In fact, let's look at, I love, love, love political cartoons. Let's look at this one. This is a political cartoon depicting the Great Game. Now I'll explain to you each one. This gentleman here represents Afghanistan. Afghanistan is right here. Yeah. And Afghanistan at the time was being contested over between Britain, represented by the lion, and Russia, represented by the bear. And as you can see, look what the guy says. Save me from my friends. That's actually kind of funny. See, I mean, that's a kind of cartoon. That's a political cartoon. And you can learn a lot about the cartoon and about its viewpoint by looking at it. You would say, well, where did the cartoon come from? Well, one cue, the caption's written in English. That means it appeared in either an American or a British newspaper. Could be probably American because it makes the British look bad. It makes the British look like an aggressor. And you don't find that a lot. So let's get back to it. That's the great game. Russia and Britain in a rivalry for dominance of Asia. And this person here represents probably Afghanistan, but actually could represent most of Asia because of the dress. So yes. There we go. So what lands were involved in the Great Game? India, Afghanistan, Persia. Great Britain withdrew from Afghanistan in 1881. I mean, here's the thing that do you need to know? I mean, I think it'd be handy to know about Afghanistan. I'm sure you know that the United States has military presence in Afghanistan right now. Please tell me you know that. Please tell me those soldiers aren't over there getting shot at, and you don't at least know that they're there. Yeah, well, yeah, there's several thousand American soldiers still having a presence, and their lives are in danger in Afghanistan, trust me. Ironically, in 1980, Russia, Soviet Union, invaded Afghanistan. And they stayed in Afghanistan for like 12 years before they got kicked out. Before that, we see here the British invaded Afghanistan in the 19th century, and they got kicked out. I think there's a pattern here. I'm not sure. I'm not saying that the United States should pull out of Afghanistan. That's a harder call and above my pay grade. The Russians agreed not to invade Afghanistan until they violated that agreement in 1979 when the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. Britain and Russia divided Persia between them, with Britain taking the southern part of Persia to block Russian access to the sea. The Russians took northern Persia. The Egyptians felt that in order to avoid the same fate of the Ottoman Empire, they would need to reform and modernize their nation in some ways. Because of Egypt's location, in fact, let's go to the map again. I'm glad I got that map. Because of Egypt's location here, yes, because of Egypt's location at the head of the Red Sea, Red Sea, Red Sea. This is the Red Sea. Because of Egypt's location here, the Suez Canal is going to be built here in 1867. A canal right across here whereby any European country to get to Asia cuts their trip in half. And this is a very strategic area. And that's what we're talking about there. So, as well as in the Eastern Mediterranean, Egypt became a great place of interest to the European powers. After Napoleon failed to control Egypt during the Napoleonic Wars, Muhammad Ali, not that guy, but yeah, a different Muhammad Ali, who had been sent by the Ottomans to solidify control over Egypt, soon himself broke away. He, Muhammad Ali, soon became recognized as the hereditary ruler of Egypt by the major European powers. He then began to reform the military and the economy. He was then directed a shift in the economy towards a cash crop, which was cotton. Yeah, cotton. See, both Egypt and India produced a type of cotton that had a very long, what they call a long staple. See, once again, when I was a child, I grew up with cotton. I hated it so bad. But yeah, I grew up with cotton. But the cotton grown in the American South was what you call had a short staple. The fibers were short. The English, or rather the Indian and Egyptian cotton had a much longer staple, and manufacturers liked it a lot better. Now the crop succeeded as a cash crop, but since everybody started growing cotton on the best land, the peasants could not grow their own food crops, and the peasants of Egypt suffered because the cost of buying food grew out of reach. Muhammad Ali's grandson Ismail began and supported the construction of the Suez Canal. Yes. Please tell me, do I have to show you where the Suez Canal is? Yes, Suez Canal again here. 1867, the French, using a guy by the name of Ferdinand de Lesseps, built the Suez Canal, which shortened that trip. So, Yeah, Ferdinand de Lesseps. Suez Canal was financed primarily by French investors, engineered by French designer Ferdinand de Lesseps. It was opened in 1869 and called the engineering marvel of the ages. Egypt soon found that uh, the other projects, and could not even pay the interest on the $450 million debt for the canal. So, since Egypt couldn't pay its debt to build the canal, Great Britain just took over management of the canal in 1882, controlled all of Egypt. Yeah, Egypt will become a British colony. Okay. Persia, with the discovery of oil, was soon controlled by British and Russian interests, and since the Persians did not have enough money to develop its oil resources. To raise money, the Iranians, Persians, began to make concessions to the Europeans and lose control of their own country. The Persians battled over the selling of tobacco to Europeans, even boycotting the product by a population who smoked very heavily. Yeah, the boycott worked, and Nasr al-Din, the ruler of Persia, had to cancel concessions to the West. The Persian government could not control its own unrest, and in 1906, the revolutionaries forced the new ruler to accept a Persian constitution. In 1907, Britain and Russia divided Persia and Iran between them. Britain took southern Iran or Persia. Russia took northern Iran or Persia. And tomorrow we will talk about India. And I think that is good enough for today.